Okay, welcome to our first lesson on the GED skills set for the 2014 test and beyond. The first skill we're going to focus on is main idea and details. And we're going to spend a considerable amount of time on this simply because it is such a critical skill for passing 3 out of the 4 GED tests. Uh, the GED is no longer just about being able to dish out knowledge and answer questions correctly. It's really about being able to utilize the skills of your reading and writing and critical thinking and logic to decide on the best answer. So being able to get the main idea from a passage is going to help you in the reading, uh, the language arts test, as well as the science and the social studies. And even in the math, when you're having to read the questions and truly fully understand what they're asking you. So the first thing I want you to do is go ahead and do this journaling activity. Pause the video for a second and answer this question by what you would text in your cell phone. Okay, so hopefully you came up with something that you could text. And I want you to think about, normally we would share what we wrote together, but how did you make your language short, concise, and to the point? Think about, did you need to write a lot to get your point across? In this day and age, we use cell phones to communicate very quickly by text um, what we're really wanting to say. We don't spend a lot of time going off into a story or giving the full background of everything. We get right to the point. If you see a joke on Facebook that you think is funny, you're likely to respond LOL. And that's because it communicates the main idea of what you're trying to say very quickly and very concisely. So, what we're going to attempt to do is basically take something that is written in longhand and narrow it to that itty bitty piece that you could text to someone quickly. Okay, this is another piece I want you to look at. Read the comic and pause the video. And after you've read the comic, I want you to give this comic a title. Okay, so hopefully you came up with a title that would reflect the main idea. And this is another strategy that we could really use. And well, sometimes you may see even questions on the GED asking you to title something. And that is really getting at the um, main idea. So if you go back to the slide with the comic, you see that the spider and the bee are kind of arguing about which one is better, and the spider ends up with, well, stripes make you look fat, and then the bee is apparently crying. So some possible titles could be the winning argument, the speechless bee, competitive insects. Every single one of them reflects that main idea of the argument between the two and the bee losing that argument. And what I'd like you to do is think about this. We don't have to write it, but think about, why are these good or bad titles? And is your title better? And if so, why? Um, okay, we're going to move on to the main idea of the acquisition resources. And this is just a way for us to kind of demonstrate what the main idea is. And you'll see slides like this in many of the presentations. And this is to show you that what the main idea is and what an implied main idea is. So go ahead and take some notes on that. I want you to know in your own words the main idea of a paragraph or text is the theme or topic which all other paragraphs, sentences, and details directly support. So think about that as being sort of the structure of the house that you're building. You have a lot of things: drywall, plumbing, flooring, roofing. But in the end, really, you need a basic structure, and that's what the main idea is. It's going to hold up your house, and that's the idea that is basically everything else is just supporting. An implied main idea is the same thing, but it's not something that's stated or written directly. And this can be something that is kind of tricky because as we go through, you'll see that a lot of times main idea is explicitly stated. It is said right out there in the open, the first sentence or the last sentence of a paragraph. It'll just come right out and say it. Now, sometimes though, you have to really, it's implied. You have to really pull it out and you have to use and pay attention to the details in order to do that. So the first step that we do is we read and examine the passage. And this is for the explicit main idea. Then we identify a topic or theme that the passage or text seems to be mostly about. We check the information, the facts and details, to be sure it all supports the topic or main idea that was identified. So for explicit main idea, you're going to be looking for really a topic sentence or a thesis statement that's going to support what you think the main idea is. And then remember that it's important to read the entire passage and identify the topic. Reread the passage again to see if all the facts and support are pointing towards that main idea. Now, an implied main idea requires you to read or examine the passage and determine the topic that is emphasized. And that's really important because it's not just going to be sitting out there for you to read. You're going to have to think about what is being emphasized. A lot of times what people will do is circle certain words or phrases that they see a lot throughout a passage. And that might help them to figure out the main idea if it's not explicitly stated. The next step is to use the organization of the text to help identify the implied main idea. This is where author's purpose comes in. You have to ask yourself, why is this person writing this? If you're reading something from CNN.com, well, you're probably reading it as a news story. And that's something important to remember. But if you're reading an ad in a newspaper where they're trying to sell you a car, you have to consider that it's persuasive and that the main idea may be to try to get you to do something, not just inform you. And this third step is identify the details the author uses to persuade the reader to agree with the main idea. Now there's that word persuade. Sometimes persuade is not as simple as trying to sell something to you or convince you of something. It's simply trying to make you believe what they're saying. And it's arguable that everything that's ever written is trying to get you to believe what they're saying. And then the last step is to create a main idea sentence and justify it using facts, details, and related details from the text. So let's look at some signal words. And these are probably words you'll want to write down or print off from the slide. And they're really important because you'll see them in the questions. Mostly about, most likely, another title, overall, mainly about, main lesson, big idea, summary, best tells, best way, generalization, and so on and so forth. These are phrases that are often used in the test, in the questions, and these will signal you to, okay, this is a main idea question. So for instance, I may read a question or read a selection and then the question might say something like, which of the best statements sums up what the author is trying to say? That I know right there that that is a main idea in details question. Okay, we're going to look at this presentation. So we're going to kind of veer off for a little bit to kind of get more into main idea. Okay, if it will let me get there. Just one moment to get out of the presentation here. Okay, sorry about that. I apologize. That is a little tricky. What we're going to look at is another presentation that really delves more into main idea. So follow along and take some notes, and I will definitely point you towards what things you'll definitely want to write down. But they kind of define main idea on this first slide. The main idea is the most important idea of a paragraph or a work. Sometimes the main idea is just for a paragraph. Sometimes it's for an entire novel. So you have to really be able to identify the overarching theme or the overarching idea that's there. Okay, so finding the main idea in a paragraph is basically taking all the sentences and all the ideas together to create one large thought. If you're able to find the subject, you can ask yourself, what is the paragraph about? So for instance, if the subject is about the Model T and the creation of the Model T, and say that's what the article is about. Well, okay, that's great. We know it's about the Model T, but that's not really the main idea. We need to get more in depth. What are they saying about the Model T? Are they talking about how it was created and trying to sort of endorse or build up the idea of the assembly line when Ford first created the Model T? Are they comparing it to today's cars and talking about how today's cars is made with as much quality? What are they trying to say about the topic? And know that every paragraph has a main idea. And sometimes they're not the same. They're going to be different or slightly different. But usually, if it's a series of paragraphs, if it's an essay or an article, each of those smaller main ideas builds upon to the larger main idea. So, where are we going to look to find the subject? First, you have to know the subject. So you can look at the title or the heading. Usually it's right there in plain English. Or look at the first sentence. Or look at names or keywords or repeated words. Like I said before, a really good practice to get into is to write down or circle, if you can, or highlight those words that are repeated or words that are italicized or bolded in the article because they are important. So let's look at this, and I want you to think about what clues can you find in the title, the first sentence, keywords or repeated words to identify the subject. Go ahead and pause the video and take a moment to do that. Okay, so what we're going to do next is really look at what repeated words there were. And as you can see, a lot of the word cowboys. So the subject must be on cowboys. We don't know yet what the main idea is because we don't know what they're saying about cowboys just by identifying this. So sometimes you'll find the main idea in the first sentence or in the last sentence. The author often states the main idea, but be careful because sometimes you have to create the main idea for yourself. It's implied, but it's not stated right out. And the way to think about that is if you think about someone being sarcastic, if you typed a sarcastic comment on Facebook, someone might read it one of two ways. They may read the sarcasm in it, or they might read it as literal and say, well, that's a really nice shirt. Wow, I'm very flattered by that. So we have to look beyond that and look at what the voice behind it is, what the attitude behind it is. And you may say, somebody else might say that's sarcastic. We need to be able to find the meaning behind it. And the rest of the paragraphs often give you details about that. So for instance, if you did that Facebook post about that's a nice shirt, but that's a really nice shirt. I would have bought it, but I couldn't afford Walmart that day. Okay, so what did that tell me about what I just said? What does that tell me about you saying that about my shirt? Well, that's a nice shirt, but I couldn't afford the Walmart that day. That's probably insulting and saying that I'm cheap or that it's not a nice, unusual shirt. It's not something that I should be proud of. It's very, very common. So we need to be able to know, like I said, the difference between the topic and the main idea. So, if you've ever tried to swat a fly, you know it's hard to hit. That's because a fly can detect moving objects extremely well. Flies view the world through compound eyes with multiple lenses. Each lens faces a different direction and views a small part of the scene. The parts add up to a complete picture in the insect's brain, which tells a fly to fly away fast. What is the subject? Okay, what is the main idea? And what are the details? The subject is a fly, plain and simple. We know it's about a fly, or flies. The main idea is flies are hard to hit. And the reason we know that is because the details tell us that flies detect moving objects well. They have compound eyes with multiple lenses, and the lenses face in different directions, and the images combined in the fly's brain. All of those details show us that flies are hard to hit. Okay, a really good way to track the main idea and track the details is to use some sort of an organizer. And this is just an example of a chart. Some people use bubble maps or any kind of a graphic image where you can use the details. And this is what I would suggest you do. I would fill in the details first. And using those details, I would then look at the subject. Okay, in the details, there's a lot of talk about those flies. So I'm going to say the subject is probably flies. And then I'm going to look at the details again, and I'm going to say, what are they saying about flies, about that subject? And then I'm going to write the main idea, and I'm going to use the connection to check my work. So if you think about math, how you'd use an equation and then you'd reverse it to make sure that it worked and you got the same answer, well, that's kind of what this connection is. Identifying the connection so that you can make sure that those details actually are connected to the main idea. Okay, so try this. And like I said, let's start with the details first. So as you're reading, fill in the details and then identify the subject and then work on the main idea statement and determine the connection. Pause the video for this activity. Okay, so what are one of the details that you might have identified? Well, Christy burst out the back door and ran into the woods. Her eyes hurt and her chest burned. She crossed a bridge and dashed into the lean-to her father had built. Okay, so I know that this is about Christy. Lots of Christy in these details, so I'm going to go with the subject that it's about Christy. But what is it saying about her? She ran out the door and ran into the woods. She hurt her eyes and her chest burned. She crossed a bridge and dashed into the lean-to her father had built. Christy is very upset that her father is leaving for war. That's the main idea. And then the connection is she wanted to feel closer to her father, so she went to a place her father had built for her. And that connects these details to the main idea, and it helps check your work. For a longer text, a paragraph is not going to be standing by itself. You're going to have to find the main idea of all of those paragraphs. We're going to kind of skip this piece because this kind of goes into different things. We're going to go back to our presentation and we're going to look at some of these stems, these stems that you might see in your questions. So which sentence best describes, states, reflects the main idea of the article? These are also question stems that many companies use to create the questions for main idea. Okay, sorry. Now on to the practice and assessment. So we're going to open a video, we're going to open an article and read it together. Okay, so going back to doing the main idea in the details first, I'm going to go ahead and open my Word template because I'm going to identify my details. And remember, I'm doing the details first so that I can then come up with the topic and then the main idea and the connection. So, starting with the details, let's go ahead and read. Okay, Drake recalls visiting Lil Wayne in prison. When Drake visited Lil Wayne last week in Rikers Island, it was an experience like no other. It was not just the country club, Drake told MTV News. It was just not the country club, Drake told MTV News on Tuesday, the day his debut album Thank Me Later was released. It wasn't his Miami condo, it wasn't Atlanta, it wasn't Tree Sound Studios, all the places I'm used to seeing him. It wasn't Club Live in Miami, it wasn't any of them. Drake has tried to wrap his head around Wayne's situation in prison. It's been difficult, but he did grasp some jewels from their visit. He kept looking through the window, Drizzy described. He'd look up at the window almost like he's looking right through it. It's frosted, so you can't see out. I was like, why does he keep staring through the window? There's nothing out there. To him, there's a whole world moving out there that he hasn't seen for so long. He was just like he told me something I never thought I'd hear him say, which was, you're the ultimate artist. You're better than me. You don't have the tattoos. You don't cause any trouble. People like you. He was like, basically, look at me and look at you. He was like, man, listen. You know what I think you're about to do? You're about to do 2 million, Drake recalled, echoing Wayne's sentiments from last week's Nino Brown Story Part 3 preview. You're about to do 2 million the first week. Drake thought back to the conversation they previously had when the Toronto native wanted to get a tattoo. Wheezy advised against it. Whatever, man. Whatever you do, do not get no tattoos, never in your life, Drake recalled Wayne telling him. They're going to think you got it because you came around me. He said the same thing to me during the Rikers visit. Don't change yourself, please. You got it. I've never met a young dude that has it figured out, but you got it. Don't mess it up. Just be you. Sing, rap, be you. Don't stop smiling. That's what he said. Okay, so after reading this, I've got to put together some details. The first thing I know is that one of the details I'm going to mention is that Drake visited Lil Wayne in prison. Okay, that's one of the first details that I can remember. Now I'm going to go back and look at it and say, okay, Lil Wayne gives him advice about tattoos. And then he kind of pumps him up. For being with it, so to speak. Okay, so now I know that my topic is about Drake and Lil Wayne. Because again, I'm seeing Drake, Wayne, Wayne, Drake, Drake. Okay, what is my main idea? So, okay, let's go back to this. Drake visited Lil Wayne in prison. He gives him advice about getting tattoos. He pumps him up for being with it. So, I'm going to say that my main idea statement is going to be basically that Drake visits Lil Wayne in prison and receives much needed advice and encouragement from him. And my connection is going to be the way I'm going to check my work, and I'm going to say, well, I know this is true because you go back to what is he saying about this? My connection is that Lil Wayne doesn't want Drake to make the same mistakes he did. Okay, so going back to our presentation, this is the kind of question we're looking at. What was Lil Wayne's message to Drake? Well, it was, don't be like me. Don't end up in prison. Don't get tattoos. what does this show about Lil Wayne's opinion of himself? And that would be something that would be a little bit implied. He doesn't come out and say that, hey, man, I messed up, but you know that he believes that. And then what would you title this video and why? Or the article, rather. Okay. Answers. Lil Wayne's message to Drake is don't end up like him, in jail and in trouble. And Lil Wayne seems to be not very proud of himself, and shameful, in fact. So, before we move on to any others, I want to focus on the idea of the implied main idea. So we're going to look at this specific slide. And this is a social studies themed slide. And this is from the Associated Press. Mexico announced some of the toughest restrictions in its history on dollar cash transactions on Tuesday in an attempt to fight money laundering that is fueling an increasingly bloody drug war. The tourists and Mexicans without bank accounts will be limited to exchanging a maximum of $1,500 per month, Finance Secretary Ernesto Cordero said. The measure is meant to help stem the flood of about $10 billion per year in suspicious cash flows that are thought to be linked to drug trafficking. So go ahead and take a moment to identify the details and then what your main idea and your topic are. Okay, so here's some questions. Using the information provided from the article and identifying your own details, we're going to check to see if we're on the same page here. What is the main concern of the Mexican government in making these changes in monetary transactions? Well, honestly, let's go back here and let's look at the text. The measure is meant to help stem the flood of about $10 billion per year in suspicious cash flows that are thought to be linked to drug trafficking. So what they're trying to do is to keep them from being able to cash in their different monetary items, dollars to pesos to francs to euros, in order to keep drug trafficking down. Okay. At this point, we are going to start writing using the main idea. Just like when you read from main ideas, you also write with main ideas in mind. So the main idea is what you use to guide your writing, and it keeps you focused and purposeful. Good writers always write with a main idea in mind. So as you're reading, think like a writer and think about what is the person trying to communicate. So look at this structure. We start with the subject. What are we going to write about? I might give you a topic, say what you did last summer. Okay, so we know we're going to write about summer. The main idea, what are you going to say about the summer? Your supporting details, what are you going to describe, use to describe your summer and what you want to say about it? And then developing details, explaining even in more detail your main idea, to make sure that all of these are supporting the main idea statement here. So your writing prompt is, what would you invent to make life better? That is your writing prompt. You're going to use that to create a short writing piece, one paragraph, and you're going to email that to your instructor at plainwellschools.org. Remember that you're going to ensure that what you're doing is focusing on the main idea in writing. So go ahead and be explicit with that. Write what you would have read and keep that main idea in your mind at all times as you're writing, and making sure all those details lead up to that. Okay, so this concludes the lesson 1 for main idea, and we're going to work on it in class some more, and I thank you for watching.